some kind of global catastrophic event that knocked humanity down a peg. And when that happened, I think the post-traumatic stress of that event even still affects us thousands of years later. We're still suffering under that trauma. That's what disconnected us from the cosmic collective. And now our goal is to try to reconnect, to try to finally heal and reconnect to the cosmic collective. That should be our highest goal at this point in time.
Did you know that Harvard thinks they've found consciousness? That they pinpointed it in June of 2018. Harvard scientists think they pinpointed the physical source of consciousness. Now, how's that going to change our direction to God? So we're going to have to get into that.
There has to be a physical interface for the consciousness to manifest through us. So, yeah, I have no problem with that. I think that relates to the biophoton concept, right? That this consciousness is made up of photonic energy. In other words, light. Not just light from outside, but this is light from inside, our inner light. And, haven't religions used that particular analogy for millennia? That notion that there is an inner light, that the essence of who we are as spiritual beings is light. And so even going back to, say, the Manichaeans, who were a Gnostic branch of Christianity, but were also kind of syncretistic, as I talked about earlier. Manichaeism blended a lot of different religions together, including early Christianity in the third century AD, in modern live. But he talks about that whole idea that the essence of who we are is light, and the goal is ultimately to release the light. This universe in which we live is a blended universe, blending both darkness and light. And our goal should be to release the light from this universe to return to the universe of light, of pure light. And so Manny taught a lot about that concept and that idea that all life forms, plant and animal, all have within us this light energy. And this light energy ultimately must be released. And in the end, when the universe comes to an end, all of this light energy should return to the universe of light. And that was what Manny believed and taught. But like I say, there's a lot of this same kind of ideas found in a lot of other religions of the world, including even Orthodox Christianity talks about the light, the spirit having an essence of light. So that's an old concept. And yet now science is finally catching up and finally realizing, there is the essence of consciousness does come from light, photonic energy.
Well, they found the AI, believe it or not. Isn't that funny how we call artificial intelligence? But they had the ventral anterior insula, and they call that the AI. So I think that's hilarious. They think they found the part of our brain. They took like 45 brain scans, but 24 of the people were like comatose and 12 weren't. And so 36 patients, 24 and 12. So 12 of them were like comatose, unconscious. But 24 of those were due to the brainstem injury, lesions, right? They were defined as being conscious. So they mapped the brainstem, and they figured out that there's one particular part of the brain that had to maintain consciousness despite all their injuries, while others had become comatose. So this is interesting. Why are some and some not comatose? I mean, all of us would want to know that, right? Because any of us could hit our head at any time, football injury, car injury. I've hit my head and had my throat cut open and my bones pulled out and somebody else's bones put in and steel rods in my neck, but I guess I'm okay. They checked me on many MRIs, although now that I'm studying with the Andrews Institute, I've got all of my MRIs sent up here. But, how do we link ourselves together to consciousness? And is our consciousness connected to Source, which I would suggest that there's much of us that we haven't even developed or known about, and we're just looking in neurology as to where is our consciousness. Now, that doesn't mean to say they know Source yet, or God, or even how to put the soul into the baby when the baby is born, or the body physical is born. But I've always wondered about when they said they were putting some of my relatives into a comatose state, because I had been comatose. I didn't like it. I couldn't. I felt deep in my brain that I could still hear people. I just couldn't wake up or see them. So I could still hear them, and I knew I was still alive. But I was so deep in my pain or physical origin that I've had many levels of existence. So, but will you study that to keep up with that thread in neurology? You can go to Sincere Alert. Harvard scientists think they've pinpointed the neural source of consciousness, because we study consciousness a lot. The Human Connect to Me project, like Connect to Me, it's spelled the same way. So just remember that and look up consciousness, because we're at that point where everything is coming forth now. It's just that time. Seemed to have started with 2017 moving forward. About we're gonna know more scientifically about who we are and what we are through the physical reality, which I'm finding sort of spooky, really. We're always getting smarter and smarter, but it's like God wants to know more about us as separate but an individual, and how we act. We're all little tiny little things when you get up off the planet. Each human just a little cell, right? But each little cell acts and operates separately from each other. Each person has their own ideas of what their thoughts are. And actually everything's a thought. And what thoughts do you want to share? So back to you. What do the thoughts that we share in our opened walk, we all have our own spiritual path, or at least that's the way we talk now. In words, we separate ourselves. So how do you feel? Do you feel like you're just a drop in the ocean of consciousness with everybody else? Bill,
well, yeah, I guess I'm speaking, we are. Each of us a drop in an ocean, and we also, each of us, reflect that source. So, in the Bible where it talks about that we were made in God's image, I see that not as relating to our physical appearance, but relating to this aspect of our consciousness. We reflect the cosmic consciousness in our own mind. And so that's the way that we are each like source. And
it's consciousness soul.
Right.
When I left, I took my thoughts with me. So I wondered if, because I knew I was in my body laying there, sunk down in my head, and I could still know I was in this reality. It's different than when I dream, and then when I lucid dream, and I know I'm somewhere in another place. It's like God is everywhere, but God's right here when we don't think linear, not forward and back, but we're all right here, being here now. Because that's linear thinking, that like the past is behind us and the future's in front of us. But it's really like a rubber band in a circle that comes right back to everything. And if God is everything, then God is everywhere, and that's us too. And I just feel like I'm just a tiny little spark, or a tiny little corpuscle, or a little piece of DNA, or a little bitty spot, and we're vibrating. And, we're not really thick. We're not really, everything that we see is not exactly what we see. Everything can be broken down into little bitty tiny, smaller than our atoms. And now we've got quarks and bioquarks and all of that. But it makes me wonder what part of gravity holds us together in a body. It's sort of spooky when you get into quantum physics and study every little thing. Have you ever thought about that? What holds you in your body? We talk about the aura, and that's outside of our physical body. But what makes us each individual if it's not some grand design?
Among the belief systems I've examined, there's this idea that each of us have our own magnetic field. Like the planet Earth has its own magnetic field. Like pretty much all bodies in space have magnetic fields, or used to. In some cases, the magnetic fields are kind of fractured, like in the case of Mars, for instance. But it still does have areas of magnetic field, but it's not, the entire planet is not surrounded like the Earth is. And in fact, the shape of that magnetic field of the Earth is basically that what they call a torus, a donut shape, which surrounds the Earth. And so imagine the Earth is in the hole of the donut, and the donut is then around us. Well, roughly speaking, that's the case. And so the same would be true of our magnetic field. It's still a toroidal shape with our spine coming up through the middle of that donut. And then the energies flow around and down and up and around and form that donut torus shape around us. When a person's emotional state is very chaotic, when they're depressed or not right with the world, their magnetic field gets all chaotic. And the shape, the torus shape, kind of breaks down, and that all just becomes these random energy flows that are seemingly random anyway, that don't work very well. So you have to get those chakras lined up. You got to get those energies flowing properly, and then you've got your nice, perfect toroidal shape of a magnetic field. And that magnetic field, I believe, is what essentially contains us within our bodies. And when we die, the magnetic field that surrounds us like this, that it essentially surrounds our aura, that field breaks up, it ruptures, so to speak. It just opens up, and then our essence of being, the photonic energy that is our essence, leaves our body forever. And or in some cases, when you have your near-death experience, you might leave for a time and then come back. In that case, I don't think the magnetic field really ruptured. It was more like a temporary trip out of the body, and for whatever reason, the universe knew you had to come back. I know you've had that experience. You want to tell the listeners? Yeah.
Well, I've died several times and left my body, especially during childbirth, and lost all the blood in my body. And lately, the little girl I had, she's going to be, she's fighting for her life because she's not making plasma cells and blood cells. And so our white plasma, we need white, red, and plasma in our body, okay? So we all have, a billion, what do they say? They say 1,000 million billion cells. Y'all can look that up. It's like 12 zeros plus a 1 cells, they say, that we have in our body. But what I'm learning about life is she's fighting to keep herself in her physical reality, and she has to fight really hard and go through a lot of pain and putting blood in white. It's really terrible for the last 2.5 years how she's had to live just because of her cells. They differentiate. So I'm doing my best to learn more about the physical reality, not so much the spiritual right now, because she needs her physical. And they said she's going to melt like jelly, and her brain will go, and her blood, she'll bleed out her eyes and her ears. It's not a good thing with this leukemia 4th stage, but every person has to have cells. And now that she's had a bone marrow transplant from her son, it turned her hair darker, her skin darker, because she has black hair and black. She did, but not. It was gone white, and it came back dark black. Her hair changed. So the cells in your body, when you put different, it was somebody else, her son's cells, it was 50% her, put it back in her tissue, but it still didn't heal her, didn't kill all the T cells in her bone, because we have to have blood to make oxygen in our tissues, and they call it epithelial tissue, protects the body and organs. the outer layer, the skin, okay? And then I watched her skin peel